In a meeting with members of a Canadian Jewish organization, His Majesty the King urges a collective effort to kickstart the Palestinian-Israeli peace process to realize the two-state solution.
The Palestinian Authority warns that Israel is enforcing severe restrictions on the entry of Muslim worshippers to Al-Aqsa Mosque in an attempt to impose a daily schedule for Jewish prayer at the holy site.
And Europe's migrant crisis escalates as more refugees fleeing wars and poverty in their countries make it to the continent this week. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10.
Hello and good evening.
His Majesty the King said a collective effort is needed to kickstart the Palestinian-Israeli peace process to arrive at the internationally backed two-state solution. King Abdullah spoke at a meeting with a delegation from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, headed by its Chief Executive Officer, Shimon Fogel, to discuss efforts to relaunch the stalled peace negotiations. The King said the Palestinian cause is the core issue in the Middle East and that the two-state solution should lead to an independent Palestinian state living in peace and security alongside Israel. He also talked about the fight against terrorism and extremism and stressed cooperation and cross-cultural and interreligious dialogue to promote the values of moderation and tolerance. The King also told the team that Jewish organizations had a key international role in support of the peacemaker efforts. The Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs is a non-partisan organization that serves as the advocacy arm of the Jewish Federations of Canada.
Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said there is no breakthrough or end in sight to any of the crises in Jordan's neighbor countries. He spoke at a meeting with heads of labor and professional associations to discuss key domestic issues and the repercussions of regional conflicts on the country. Mansour said the Palestinian cause, the central issue in the region, is now in its deepest freeze with no action being made towards finding a solution to the conflict. He blamed Israel's intransigence and the policies of its right-wing government that hinder any endeavor towards a solution. The Prime Minister said the volatile regional situation compels Jordan to look seriously at its internal affairs and the defense of the country's borders, noting that the armed forces had been on alert for over 3 years that sapped its energies, arms and finances. He cited the repeated cross-border smuggling attempts and called for citizens' vigilance.
Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Judeh held talks with German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier on Jordanian-German ties and developments in the Middle East. The Berlin talks also covered efforts to stop violence and achieve peace and security, as well as the international fight against terrorism. Judeh said Jordan rejects terrorism and extremism and stood against any group or ideology that seeks to distort the preaching of Islam. The two ministers also talked about international support for Jordan in the war against terrorism and terror groups. Judeh also highlighted the burden Jordan shoulders as the result of hosting Syrian refugees and providing them with humanitarian relief and medical and social services.
Also in Berlin, the parliamentary group of Germany's ruling Christian Democratic Union and Christian Social Union invited Foreign Minister Judeh to a meeting on regional and international issues. German Chancellor Angela Merkel joined leaders of the two parties at the meeting. Judeh briefed the two parties about Jordan's perspective towards regional and international issues, foremost of which is the fight against terrorism.
The Senate's Joint Legal and Administrative Committee passed the decentralization draft law as referred from the lower house with minor amendments. The bill sets a 10% quota of the governorate's seats for women who had won the highest number of votes in the constituency on the condition that no more than one seat will be allotted for women in each electoral district. According to the law, 75% of members of each governorate council will be elected, while the other 25% will be appointed by the cabinet. The Joint Committee's decision cancelled the bachelor degree as a minimum education requirement to run for presidency and the membership of the provincial councils.
Anti-narcotics agents in Mafra Governorate thwarted an attempt to smuggle in about 500,000 drug pills destined to a neighboring country using livestock. A public security department statement said police and anti-narcotics officers were tipped off that a pickup truck carrying sheep contained large amounts of drugs. It said security forces erected checkpoints on nearby roads and stopped the vehicle, and that a search yielded the drug pills that were hidden in the wool of the sheep. The driver was arrested and is being interrogated to identify those behind trafficking bid.
The Palestinian Ministry of Endowment said Israel is imposing severe restrictions on Palestinians' entry to Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in a bid to initiate a daily schedule for Jewish prayers at the site, Islam's holiest shrine. The ministry echoed concerns expressed by Palestinian worshippers and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as restrictions on Palestinian worshippers to the compound ran into the second consecutive week. Worshippers said Israeli officers inspected all Palestinian men entering the compound and denied entry to a number below the age of 40. They added that many others were asking to leave their identity cards at Israeli checkpoints outside entry gates. Meanwhile, around 30 right-wing Jews were given access into the compound through the Moroccan gate under heavy Israeli police escort.
Turkish authorities said they are in contact with their counterparts in Iraq over the kidnapping of 18 construction workers in Baghdad. Gunmen in military uniform seized the Turkish workers from a sports stadium they were building in northeastern Baghdad earlier in the day. Ankara called it a targeted attack. Turkish Deputy Prime Minister Numan Kurtulmuş said the two countries were working together to find the kidnappers.
18 workers who were working for a construction firm in Iraq in Baghdad have been kidnapped. We are in contact with our Iraqi counterparts. For the moment, they don't have any knowledge how this incident happened and who kidnapped our citizens.
Asked about a Turkish soldier who went missing last night following cross-border fire from Daesh-held territory in northern Syria, which left one soldier dead, the Turkish officials said no contact had been established with him. The missing serviceman and abducted workers raised the specter of another possible hostage scenario involving Turkish citizens. Last year, the ultra-radical Daesh militants seized 46 Turkish citizens in the Iraqi city of Mosul. The hostages were released unharmed after more than 3 months. Diplomats say Turkey's decision to launch attacks against Daesh has increased the risk of reprisals.
At least 10 people were killed and scores wounded when a car bomb exploded in the Syrian city of Latakia. The explosion in a main square was a rare attack in a coastal stronghold of President Bashar al-Assad. Syrian state television showed burned vehicles in an area littered with the wreckage of cars smashed by the force of the blast. There was no claim of responsibility for the attack, which state media said was carried out by terrorists.
Saudi-led coalition jets bombed Houthi-held Dulaimi Air Base and a military college in the Yemeni capital Sana'a. The repeated airstrikes shocked the capital, sending large plumes of black smoke rising over the city. There were no immediate reports of casualties. Saudi-led forces have been waging an air campaign against the Iran-allied Houthis since March to try to halt the group's expansion and restore exiled President Abdurrabba Mansour Hadi to power. The northern-based Houthis seized Sana'a in September last year, then took control of much of the country. But forces loyal to Hadi, supported by Saudi-led airstrikes, have made significant advances since July. Later, the Houthi rebels said at least 20 people were killed and dozens wounded in 2 bombings in a northern district of the Yemeni capital, Sana'a.
Europe's migrant crisis is worsening as more refugees fleeing wars and poverties in their countries have made it to the continent this week. In Hungary, hundreds of migrants resumed protests in front of Budapest's main railway terminus, with riot police lining up on one side of the square. Here's more.
This is the scene at Budapest Keleti railway termini. For the second consecutive day, hundreds of migrants are just waiting in the square and chanting for their freedom. For them, freedom means traveling aboard the trains bound for Germany while only Hungarians with IDs and foreigners with valid passports could board the trains.
We are really here in a jail and we can't go anywhere because the police is really, you can't find them anywhere. And maybe will catch you and take you, and maybe they do anything with you. I don't know.
The German Interior Minister blamed Hungary for the status of asylum seekers and called on Budapest to abide by the EU rules regulating their movement.
Nein, das Dublin-Abkommen ist nicht ausgesetzt. Wir
The
bestehen
Dublin Agreement has not been suspended. We insist that current law is adhered to everyone, and we have said that clearly to Hungary. The law includes a complete registration of all people coming to Europe.
The migrant crisis is sweeping other parts in Europe. This is an accommodation tent camp in the Czech Republic, set up to accommodate 300 migrants who are expected to arrive from neighboring countries. And in Switzerland, the Swiss army built tents outside a refugee camp near Bern to house migrants as more and more people seek asylum in the country. Although Europe's decision makers are trying to solve the problem, the migrant crisis leaves asylum policies in tatters. Men, women and children walk along the train tracks from Serbia into Hungary while it's still dark, hoping to evade authorities. 2,000 to 3,000 migrants make the journey every day, hoping to travel onwards to Germany or other richer countries in Western Europe. The sheer number of migrants seeking asylum is part of the problem. Hungary has become a primary gateway for migrants traveling overland through the Balkans into the EU. The problem is worsening every day as Europe braces itself for more migrants fleeing wars and poverty in their countries. Today, some 150 migrants and refugees arrived at the Sicilian port of Pozzallo after being rescued at sea. Nearly 1,000 people were picked up from the boats in the Mediterranean yesterday, and 4 people discovered dead on one of the boats. The UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, said more than 700 people, including women and children, were rescued in the Mediterranean by a Norwegian ship yesterday. The migrants, mostly from Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal and Ivory Coast, were picked up by ships patrolling the Mediterranean. The International Organization for Migration said more than 350,000 migrants and refugees have crossed the Mediterranean in search of a better life this year. It said some 2,634 people have died on the way to Europe. Rad Bush for the news at 10.
Lebanon's Interior Minister Nihad Mashnouk said any future sit-in by protesters in government institutions will be broken up by force if needed. The warning came day after demonstrations briefly occupied the Environment Ministry. Lebanon was hit by a series of protests over a trash crisis that led to piles of trash building up in the streets in recent weeks, as well as anger about political paralysis. Dozens of activists from the You Sting protest movement entered the Environment Ministry and called on the Environment Minister to resign. The Interior Minister said 8 members of the security services were referred to a disciplinary council for acting without following orders at a previous protest.
Greek authorities seized a freighter carrying an undeclared shipment of weapons en route from Turkey to Libya. A Coast Guard patrol boat raided the vessel yesterday 20 nautical miles northeast of Crete. The United Nations has imposed an embargo on weapons shipments to Libya, which is plagued by factional conflict. The Greek Coast Guard provided no details of what kind of arms the freighter had on board or its ownership. But a Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesman confirmed the cargo included weapons, but said it was fully documented and was destined for the Sudanese police force. He said the vessel was also carrying building materials for Libya.
More than a century after first-class passengers aboard the ill-fated Titanic ate grilled mutton chops and custard pudding in an elaborate dining room, the ship's last luncheon menu is expected to fetch up to $70,000 in an online auction. The luxury cruise liner sank in the Atlantic Ocean in 1912 after striking an iceberg during its maiden voyage. The menu was saved by first-class passenger Abraham Lincoln Salmon and is signed on the back of a passenger from New York who likely had eaten lunch with the salmon that day. Stamped with the White Star Line logo, the menu included corned beef, mashed, fried and baked jacket potatoes, a buffet of fish, ham and beef, an apple, mernag, pastry and a selection of 8 cheeses.
Third-seeded Andy Murray put on a composed display to overcome Nick Kyrgios 7-5, 6-3, 4-6, 6-1 to reach the second round of the U.S. Open. Murray, the 2012 U.S. Open champion and 2013 Wimbledon winner, beat Kyrgios in their 3 previous meetings, eliminating him this year from 2 other Grand Slams. Murray will next play French Adrian Manarino.
In the same tournament, Roger Federer was in a different class than his first-round opponent, beating Leonardo Mayer 6-1, 6-2, 6-2. 77 minutes after the opening serve at Arthur Ashe Stadium, the 34-year-old Federer walked away with victory against the Argentine. Federer has reached the finals of his last 3 events, including Wimbledon, where he lost to world #1 Novak Djokovic, and a U.S. Open tune-up in Cincinnati, where he beat Djokovic for the title. Now let's have a look at the weather forecast for tonight in Amman and across the hilly areas, and moderate to relatively hot in the Jordan Valley and Badia regions. Tomorrow, hot conditions will prevail in most regions across the kingdom, while winds will be northwesterly moderate, picking up at times and stirring dust in the Badia regions.
The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a very hot day tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. In a meeting with members of Canadian Jewish Organization, His Majesty the King urges a collective effort to kickstart the Palestinian-Israeli peace process to realize the 2-state solution.
The Palestinian Authority warns that Israel is enforcing severe restrictions on the entry of Muslim worshippers to Al-Aqsa Mosque in an attempt to impose a daily schedule for Jewish prayer at the holy site.
And Europe's migrant crisis escalates as more refugees fleeing wars and poverty in their countries make it to the continent this week. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair.
And I'm Loy Balka. Thank you for watching. Have a good night and stay cool.